2020 was a terrible year, but I have decreed at least some months of uplifting, wholesome, lovely history content on this channel. The spring and summer of 2021 is the season of love. I'm going to be covering the entire process, how the Tudors dated, got engaged, organised weddings, and what a Tudor wedding looked like. It's going to be a hell of a toboggan ride, and hopefully we'll bust a few myths about the history of love. Let's start with the most romantic day of the year. My cat's birthday. I guess it's also St. Valentine's Day, the often derided and mocked Valentine's Day. There's a lot of misinformation about the origins of this holiday, and I thought that I, your local friendly pedantic history nerd, should address where St. Valentine's Day is thought to really come from, the early origins of this holiday, and how the Tudors celebrated the day of love and romance. Steve Roud in the English Year has noted that the origins of St. Valentine's Day are pretty obscure. Nothing about romance or love has anything to do with any of the saints and martyrs that might be the Saint Valentine for this day. And yes, saints. There are quite a few different St. Valentines in the world. Officially, the Catholic Church recognises at least 3 different saints or martyrs that are called Valentine or Valentinus, and they were all martyred in the days of the early church. There is a Saint Valentine of Rome, who was imprisoned for ministering to Christians persecuted by the Roman Empire in the 3rd century. He's supposed to have restored sight to a blind daughter of his jailer and was executed. There is Saint Valentine of Terni, a bishop who was also a minister to persecuted Christians and also executed. And there are nearly 30 emperors, popes, a Valentina or 2 and other unidentified martyrs who might also be known as Saint Valentine. It's kind of hard to sort out their hagiographies and stories from each other, as Valentine was a very, very, very popular name in the late Roman Empire. Valio or valens, which is the root word of Valentine, means strong, healthy, good traits for a baby or a potted plant to have. The stories of the Saints Valentine were not written or documented during the 4th century when they supposedly lived. Scholars and monks of the 6th and 7th century often went back to old accounts of Christian martyrs and, wrote specific acts to create a solid, cohesive literature of the early lineage of the Christian Church. It's not done maliciously or to try and create a phony history of the Catholic Church, but more from a sense of obligation that those who died would be remembered and honoured properly. The lack of concrete information on the Valentines, who may or may not have been the same person, just muddied the waters a little bit. It was not helped by the early popularity of the Valentines. Cults for the Valentines existed pretty soon after they died. Pope Julius I in the 4th century built a major basilica for Valentine of Rome. This was the first one. Major shrines for the second one, Valentine of Terni, were built from the 7th century onwards right across Europe. Valentine, in his evolved and unevolved form, was the patron saint of epileptics and beekeepers. That's 2 vastly different skills right there, but both very important. The Venerable Bede wrote of the Acts of Valentine in the 8th century and was one of the first to use the specific date of the 14th of February in his romantic hagiography. Hold your horses, that's not that kind of romance, or it's not that romance. This is imaginative spiritual development romance. So, the boring kind. Given that Bede was venerable, so mostly trustworthy, the stories of St. Valentine spread in influential saints' hagiographies of Florus, Aldo, Habanius, Maurus, Eusard and Notka. Valentine's saintly presence was further enhanced by the writings of the Bishop of Dol, who in 1120 wrote about the powers of the head of the priest of Terni. How's your head doing?
I haven't had any complaints yet.
Monks would take him out, take this head out, and they would go bless the fields, and it would bring a bounteous harvest, plenty of crops and good weather, so no complaints there, but a furthering of the mythology of St. Valentine. As you can see, there's no real link between the Saint's Valentine and anything to do with love. In fact, most of what we presume we know of either St. Valentine were created as part of false histories in the 18th century. This is where the stories that you might know were devised. You know, the Valentine of Rome sent the first Valentine to the woman he loved, or that he performed weddings for Christian soldiers who were forbidden to marry under the Roman Empire. These stories emphasise him as a romantic hero who would do anything for love, a way to justify his connection to an industrialised holiday that had nothing to do with him, or any of the 30 other St. Valentines. This is both answered simply and also longly. The simple answer is that the official feast day for St. Valentine was established by Pope Galacus I in 496 CE, who stated that St. Valentine of Rome died on that day in 269 Nice CE. This was repeated by the Venerable Bede in his hagiographies, and then carried on as part of the tradition of St. Valentine. There, done, that's it. Bye. But because history is one big mess, there is another longer explanation as to why the 14th of February has become the big Valentine's Day and linked with Mr. Saint the Valentine. There's a theory put forward by some historians who claim that the middle of February was chosen for a Christian festival of love presided over by Saint Valentine because the early Catholic Church wanted to take over a popular pagan festival that took place at the same time in order to sway people of the Roman Empire into, just shrugging, accepting Christ into their lives, giving up all their other traditions. The Lupercalia was a fertility festival dedicated to Faunus, Roman god of agriculture, as well as the founders of Rome, and it took place at the Ides of February, around about the 15th, although dates are changeable because the Romans had problems with their calendar. The Lupercalia saw men participate in the ritual sacrifice of a goat, fun, romantic, bossing it, and then run through the streets of Rome, whipping people, and women would try to push themselves forward to get whipped in the belief that it would make labour easier or make pregnancy more likely to happen over the next year. I know, right? Nothing gets me hotter than a man dripping with goat blood whipping me with a big leather thong as I'm just trying to walk to the shops in the forum and get my groceries done, and then this man comes along and bothers me. Ugh! So romantic, right? There are a lot of books and words and theories linking the Lupercalia to St. Valentine's Day, and you'll probably see it repeated in puff pieces that are republished every Valentine's Day. There is absolutely no link between the two. Like, zero. Nada. Nothing. The Lupercalia is not about love and romance. There's nothing about couples, it's just a wider spring fertility festival, and St. Valentine's Day didn't really begin as we recognise it until the 14th century, so literally 1400 years later. That is a huge gap, and the association of the Lupercalia with St. Valentine's Day didn't begin until the 18th century when big boy Enlightenment brains wanted to link Rome to everything. If you want to make it look official and historic, you just slap on the Roman Empire and makes it classy, you see? You want to make it classy? You put in the Roman Empire. That's a terrible accent. Alfred L. Kellogg and Robert C. Cox made a lot of very convincing claims that Pope Galacus purposely set St. Valentine's Day around the Lupercalia and moved the date of Candlemas, which is the purification of the Virgin Mary, in order to circumvent the population's love of the wicked pagan festival. This would mean that St. Valentine would inherit the implication of love and fertility, and this is brought up in pretty much every article about, oh my god, 14 St. Valentine's Day facts that you never knew. This is a very modern idea, this view that the early Christian church inserted themselves into the Roman Empire like a parasite and grew till it couldn't be contained. This is part of a wider Protestant viewpoint of medieval Catholicism as an implicitly evil and corrupting force that doesn't really bear up to much scrutiny. We know that Gelasius never adapted pagan customs for Christianity, and that he actually considered the idea as contaminating the dignity of the church. He changed dates around and promoted different saints because of an ongoing conflict between the East and Western churches that continued until the 8th century. And this had nothing to do with a pre-imperial festival that may have not even been very popular or widely celebrated by the time that it officially ended. The specific date of the 14th of February, has a much more wiggly, chaotic, natural history. And by natural, I mean sometimes things just happen because of a culmination of a lot of weird factors and not because of a specific guy deciding something specifically. Let's get into it. February the 2nd sees the final celebration of the Christmas season. The aforementioned Candlemas, the purification of the Virgin Mary and the celebration of the baby G being presented at Temple in Jerusalem. In medieval England, this celebration was considered the birth of spring. You might think, right, beginning of February, sure, truly the start of spring. But the beginning of the farming season was worked out by calculations of the vernal equinox. Yeah, hot stuff, I know. Different calculations gave different dates for the start of spring, either March or February. An old English folk saying that frozen winter flies from dwellings on the 7th of February and Isidore of Seville's calculations saw spring start at the beginning of the month of February. And this is where we get into some long stuff. Frederick of Hohenstaufen's De Venandi cum Avis, written in the 13th century, argued that, and this is a long quote, this season as a rule an even temperature, which induces an abundance of blood and sperm, and an excess of these two humours arouses a desire in both sexes to indulge in coitus, resulting in racial reproduction. And he doesn't mean racial like we mean race, kind of means people back then. What he means is that spring warming temperatures means that people and animals feel like getting frisky. It reflects, in the Avis, a long-recorded natural observation in birds. Prompted by the season, birds return to their native habitats, sing to locate mates and make their choices, and go to start families. There are birds that traditionally start pairing off in February. So the birds that start pairing off include blackbirds, thrushes, partridges, rooks, herons, lapwings, grebes, and ravens. So there were many popular folk songs that linked birds, the blooming of flowers, the beginning of spring and the start of a new season, summer, a brand new word in the English language. And these were just part of many reasons to associate February with the start of spring, the start of a new cycle, the return of sexual urges, and with love. But it took one guy, one man, one vision. A vision of smushing together the feast day of a random saint and the day that birds traditionally were supposed to marry. That man was Geoffrey Chaucer.
The lily among the thorns. Geoffrey Chaucer's the name.
Yes. In between providing narration and introductions for the jousting matches of Sir Ulrich von Liechtenstein, Geoffrey Chaucer found time to dabble in poetry. Yeah. Just a little. Chaucer is perhaps the most important English poet ever because he legitimised the use of common, raggedy, plain old, peasant-speaking English as a legitimate literary language above French or Latin. Working as a comptroller and clerk for the English court, he wrote pieces for the English royal court to mark occasions and grand events. His 1382 Parliament of Fowls is the first association of Valentine's Day with romantic love. It's a poem about birds finding their perfect matches. I'm going to read a section. It's not in Middle English, so I'm just checking my cue cards there. For this was on St. Valentine's Day, when every bird comes there to choose his match, of every kind that men may think of. and that so huge a noise they began to make, that earth and air and tree and every lake was so full that not easily there was space for me to stand, so full was all the place. But why did he decide to associate the feast day of St. Valentine with romantic love? St. Valentine was actually a pretty popular saint to write about around the time of Chaucer's writing. There was a number of very prominent medieval works featuring Valentine, or one of them, the Valentines, mushed together into one body. There was the South English legendary, the 13th century, a 48-line rhyming narrative of the life of Valentine that was probably a key source that Chaucer used. A popular dramatic play called The Drama of St. Valentine was enjoyed by the French royal court, but both of these were more saintly than lovey-dovey in nature. Within England, St. Valentine was famous for being, well, a head. You know what I was saying earlier about that magical head of his? Well, literally, England had a copy of his head. The one in France was still there. We had also one. The head of a St. Valentine could be found at Hyde Abbey, Winchester, after being donated by Queen Emma, Norman wife of Ethelred the Unready. He's one of the early English ones before the Norman conquest. And a feast day was held for the head in February every year. Can I conclusively prove that Chaucer knew about the head, knew about all these works and was inspired by them? No. But the abbot of Hyde Abbey lived in Southwark and regularly visited the English royal court where Chaucer worked, so there's a potential link there. Perhaps. Maybe.
I've connected the two dots.
You didn't connect shit, but
I've connected them.
So we have a saint who is relatively well known, but their history's kind of vague. Their feast day falls right in the week where summer and spring begin, where we believe that birds are getting married. If I was to write a romantic poem about the season, it would make sense for me to use St. Valentine in my poetry. After all, the other saints of February are 100% not sexy. There's Scholastica and Austerberta, their names telling you exactly what they're associated with. And there's Eulalia and Ermenhilda, saints of ascetic charity. Not sexy unless you have a really specific kink. So, Valentine. There's a bunch of new legends about him. He comes in that gap for the start of spring. He's a really malleable figure to write about and create an entirely new tradition around. The lack of any textual evidence for a Valentine's Day tradition before Chaucer strongly suggests that he and his literary circle began the association of Valentine as a patron saint of love in all its many forms. They created a brand new literary tradition, taking from these stories of Valentine, taking from other saint stories that featured people who became saints after years of being heroic lovers and husbands first. They created something completely brand new, and following Chaucer's death in 1400, the transformation of Valentine into a saintly parallel of Cupid was well underway. All evidence that we currently have available suggests that Geoffrey Chaucer created Valentine's Day out of whole cloth and just was like, yeah, this is a tradition, I'm starting it, it's mine. I mean, that could change, honestly. A monastery or a library or a country house could find a long-lost history of St. Valentine based on a Roman text that we never knew about. That's kind of the brilliant thing about history. What we think we know, or the assumptions that we have, kind of change every day as we learn more and find more artifacts. It's pretty cool. What we do know is that the earliest description of February the 14th as an annual celebration of love appears in the Charter of the Court of Love, allegedly issued by Charles VI of France in 1400, so the same year Chaucer died. It describes lavish festivities to be attended to by the court, including feasts, song and poetry competitions, jousting, dancing, and the ladies of the court would rule in disputes of the heart. that there's no real evidence this actually happened, but it's possible to see this as evidence of the Saints' Day of the Valentines becoming associated with a recurring celebration of love. Certainly, the name Valentine became fashionable again and carried associations of beauty, love, romance. The earliest surviving Valentine's poems, as in poems that are actually described as Valentines, were written by Charles, Duke of Orleans, to his wife. He was being held in the Tower of London following capture at the 1415 Battle of Agincourt, and he was probably heavily influenced by the works of Chaucer. I have to quote now in French, and I can't. A, my French is bad, and B, my medieval French is like nil point. Je suis déjà d'amour tanné, ma très douce Valentine. He also wrote, thank God, Valentine's poetry in English. All well is him this day that hath him caught, a Valentine that loveth him. It is also suggested he came up with the lottery idea that was used by the Tudors to celebrate Valentine's Day, which we'll talk about in a moment. The earliest surviving Valentine, written in non-poetic English, appears in the Pastimes letters. For those who haven't heard of them before, you should do. The Pastimes letters are amazing and awesome and very cool. It's a huge collection of personal correspondence between the Norfolk-based Paston family and their friends, their relatives, and they cover a time period from 1422 to 1509. As you can imagine, these are an amazing primary resource for seeing into the everyday gentry life of the period. Marjorie Bruce in 1477 wrote to her future husband John Paston and referred to him as her right well-beloved Valentine. She informs him that she is not in good health of body nor of heart, nor shall I be till I hear from you. There was a lot of drama surrounding the match of Marjorie to John. Her family wasn't quite good enough to marry into the Pastons, and there was a lot of arguments about her dowry and her social position. But Marjorie says, if you love me, as I trust verily that you do, you will not leave me therefore. And they did end up getting married and having 3 children. As for how Valentine's Day was actually celebrated, it was mostly pretty low-key. Charles, Duke of Orleans, is credited with the lottery celebration that was often used by the wealthier classes. Everyone would put their name into a lot, you'd pull out one, and then you'd have to write that person a poem or buy them a gift. You know, it's pretty simple. There are household accounts of a man called William Petre that show gold trinkets and cloth being accounted for as gifts for a Valentine's Day lottery. His records show that one of his maids won his lottery and he gave her an extra quarter of wages as her gift. Here comes the money. Whether this sort of gift giving and poetry swap was done by all class groups in society, we just don't know. The evidence is not out there. We haven't got it. Give me that evidence. Some country house is going to have some somewhere. There are some royal charters issued by Henry VIII for Valentine's Day fairs, which could suggest that the common sorts were aware and celebrated the day to a certain degree. That William Shakespeare, who wrote entertainment for the masses, mentions Valentine's Day in his plays would indicate there was a certain level of knowledge of the day within his circle and the audiences of London. That said, using the cosmopolitan urban centre of London to track trends across the entirety of Tudor England as was, it's not great. What can be true in London can be very untrue in a place like Newcastle or Penzance. You know, what is known in London is not necessarily what is known and celebrated at the wider reaches of England. Here's a quote, a Shakespeare quote of Valentine's. Tomorrow is St. Valentine's Day, all in the morning betime, and I am made at your window to be your Valentine. Then up he rose and donned his clothes and ducked the chamber door, let in the maid that out a maid never departed before. I don't think my rhyming scheme was quite good, but Even the most boring Valentine poem scheme, Roses Are Red, can be traced back to the Tudor era. Edmund Spenser's poem, The Fairy Queen of 1590, has the following lines. She bathed with roses red and violets blue, and all the sweetest flowers that in the forest grew. The term Valentine was used for lover or sweetheart, but the fashion for writing poems or holding Valentine's Day lotteries went in and out of fashion until it came back with a vengeance in the 18th century. And then capitalism picked up this holiday and said, we can make money with this, and then made it into what it is today. I mean, as an aside from your humble pedantic historian, I personally don't really like St. Valentine's Day and the huge amount of junk associated with the holiday.
Ah, what a terrible waste.
Yes, but the memories will last a lifetime. Get it, crap!
Let's bring back gift and poetry lotteries between friends. You know, little simple things. Much nicer. I sort of decided on a whim to look into the history of St. Valentine's Day. I was a bit surprised by what I found, actually. Firstly, the weird and complicated history of St. Valentine and the sheer lack of information out there. Seriously, most of what I found was just reworded and repurposed from other limited sources, and there was a lot of misinformation out there. This is my tiny way of trying to readjust that and be pedantic and write in all the ways that I personally like. Thanks to everyone who watches, enjoys this. Please remember to do that whole shout out shebang, like, subscribe, recommend to other people. Those chestnuts. I do have a Coffee link where you can make a one-time donation because it costs money to do the research. And there's also an Amazon wish list of research materials that I need to update, really. But if you have a look on that list and you find anything that you have access to through not Amazon, send me a message and maybe we can sort something out. If you know of a great new work of historical research that you think I must absolutely check out before I do anything else, comment and tell me below. You can see a little heart. Valentine's Day. I'm aiming to keep up my 2 video a month schedule this year, but whether I do is up in the air. I am back in teaching, not quite full time, but it feels like it. And my real life students are obviously my priority, but I still want my internet students to be educated. So let's start 2021 as the year of love and see where we go from there. I'm not romantic or lovely.